raids. Everybody's back with me. The numbers don't exactly align with everybody being violent and dangerous. In terms of who's been arrested, according to multiple outlets that have done this reporting and this analysis, including NBC News and others, the majority of people that are being taken in, the only crime that they have committed was crossing the border illegally. In terms of violent criminals, those numbers are not as high as Tom Homan is projecting, although he disputes those reports. One of the reasons we're seeing so many of these protests is for that very reason. The words of the administration are not lining up with what people are experiencing or witnessing on the streets. And we have some new YouGov polling regarding ICE operations, including the polling taken, Cornell, the day Renee Good was shot. Here is how people feel about how ICE is handling their job. 52% disapprove. How would you describe tactics currently being used by ICE? 51% say too forceful. Do you think there is currently a war or a conflict happening in any U.S. cities? The government, the federal government, the administration has said, yes, there is. Only 9% would say a war. 49% say a conflict, which is significant. 26% say neither. In terms of support for abolishing ICE, in January of 2025, this number's changed quite a bit. 25% supported abolishing ICE. In January of 2026, 42% of the American public says that. Are these numbers the administration has to pay attention to if they want to keep their seats? Republicans want to keep their seats, or can they just cater, Cornell, to their bases and still win?
Well, I don't think the administration has to cater to those numbers, but if you're a congressional Republican in a swing district, I think you're alarmed by that. The number that you just gave last, Katie, about the number who are approving of abolishing ICE. Look, go back a couple of campaign cycles ago, and Republicans were using the idea that Democrats were for abolishing ICE as a wedge issue to beat Democrats up. It's increasingly being shown here that Americans are getting out in front of the ideal of abolishing ICE, and why would they not? I mean, what are the images have been, right? Is the images of ICE has been tackling a young mother, breaking down doors, tear gassing residential areas, and shooting into a car window, and a mom losing her life. The approval of ICE is underwater, and in our internal polling, it's even underwater more than that. 56% disapprove of ICE, and when you look at independent voters, I mean, they're strongly disapproving of ICE. Is even higher, and in our polling, we show a 54% majority of voters don't think that ICE is primarily about illegal immigration, which the numbers sort of bear out, because the worst of the worst they're not actually getting. So yes, if you are a congressional Republican, this is really problematic to you, because the issue of immigration was a winning issue for Republicans in the past. It is increasingly becoming a losing issue for them.
Yeah. So on that subject, equating ICE with immigration, there are a lot of those same people that are probably saying they're not happy with ICE and they're uncomfortable with ICE, or they want it abolished, who also could have voted on immigration issues and wanted tougher immigration enforcement at the border. The border numbers, in terms of the number of people who supported shutting down the border or getting a handle on the border, were quite high, and it's part of the reason why Donald Trump won and why Democrats lost. So how do Democrats, you advise Democrats, how should they thread that needle? How do they react to this community horror, this country's horror at what they're witnessing, but then also don't fall into the trap that Republicans lay, which is that they want open borders and no structure to be selective about who comes into this country and who does not?
Well, I think you can be for, border security, which, by the way, Katie, as you know, and you reported on, Democrats and Republicans had struck a deal in the Senate to, in fact, do immigration reform. And what one of the guests talked about earlier is that we have a broken immigration system, right? And there's a bipartisan agreement about trying to fix this broken immigration system, which the president, which then Donald Trump said, kill it, right? So Democrats can be for fixing the immigration system and reforming the immigration system, but at the same time be against what is clearly thuggish behavior by our federal government and our federal government not being transparent with the American people. I don't think those things are at conflict at all. I do think you will see more Democrats taking on this issue of immigration on the offensive going into this election, because Republicans have lost their advantage on it, and a number of Americans are really, really upset about what they see happening in their community.
What does the message sound like? Does it say, I want, I agree with the stricter policing at the border, or I agree with shutting down the border, but I also think there should be a pathway to citizenship? What does that message sound like, Cornel?
Well, I think each campaign has to structure their own message, but clearly, the ideal that we must put a check on, and this comes from a Republican friend of mine, who says the Democrats run on anything other than putting a check on the power of Donald Trump and the federal government, you've lost your minds. And I think ICE is one pillar of that conversation about a need to put a check on Donald Trump and this out of control thuggish government.